Hello and welcome to Wrestler Spotlight. I'm the Maritime Warrior, Cory, as you might know. I'm joined by the host of the BSHL podcast, Cory Show.
The Unofficial Bozier Senior Hockey League podcast on YouTube. That's me.
You're pretty official to me, so.
Thanks, Cory. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for doing this. A lot of people might know this. They might not know this. Cory's favorite wrestler is Lance Storm, and that is the topic of the next couple of episodes. Lance Storm, early memories of Lance Storm. I know he debuted in 1990, won the CWC title. His early career, he teamed with Chris Jericho. You remember those?
Yeah, they were the Thrill Seekers early on.
They had two names. They were Sudden Impact.
Sudden Impact at first, right? At first,
and in Smoky Mountain, they were the Thrill Seekers.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So they started off in Canadian Indies as Sudden Impact, and then they kind of split up and went their own ways for a bit, and both went international a ton and kind of traveled a lot, and then they came back together.
Yeah, their first big territory, I'd say, I don't know if you know this, they wrestled in the early years of FMW, Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling in Japan. There's a funny story that they thought they weren't on the card because they were looking, and they're not there. And then all of a sudden they realize, holy shit, we're the main event. And they're like a year into their career. They're like, what are we going to do? So, in the Smoky Mountain Wrestling, Lance and Chris, they were the Thrill Seekers. An unfortunate arm injury to Chris Jericho. He broke his arm. So Lance Storm gets his first taste of singles competition. What do you remember about Lance Storm? Like, what's your first memories of Lance Storm for you personally?
So my first memories of Lance Storm are ECW related. I saw a Lance Storm match in 1999 at Anarchy Rules, I believe it was, him versus Jerry Lynn.
Yeah.
I think it was the first match of the card, and I was like, whoa, this is like some chain wrestling and lots of stuff, and I was like, right on, like this is I'm just a fan of that style of wrestling, and it stuck with me. I remember I had bought the VHS, I watched that match a few times, and then I started to kind of, this was the very early internet days, so I remember going on message boards on GameFAQs.com and reading about Lance Storm, and this was long before YouTube. But I tried to watch as much as I could back then on like TNN. There wasn't a lot of it in Canada, unfortunately.
No. Same here. Lance Storm, the first time I saw him was also... It might have been there. It might have been in... I tape traded a little bit. It was hard to come by. I think the first time I saw Lance Storm might have been in War. Wrestling and Romance.
Yep.
He had a popular tag team there with Yuji Yasuraoka. They won the War International Junior Heavyweight Tag Team titles. I know you're a big fan of the Japanese style and all that. Don't know if you were a fan of Japanese wrestling.
Yeah, I am.
You can see the influence on Lance Storm, like through going to Japan and just that chain wrestling style. In ECW, what's the first memory you have of like a big program? Was it in 1999 that you first saw him?
1999-ish that I first remember like taking notice. His stuff with the Impact players was just incredible. Yeah. Was phenomenal, man. That was just some good stuff. And then, those are my early memories. And then his WCW run is very vivid to me. WCW at that point was a train wreck.
Yeah.
But he was getting the push of a lifetime.
Yeah. So you missed out on Lance Storm starting in ECW.
Yeah.
The match with Rob Van Dam, the rat tail on the back of his head, the worst haircut ever, just like this shaved head, but a little rat tail in the back. He had a popular program with Chris Candido, where they were I think he was sort of part of the Triple Threat. They were tag team champions for around 6 months, maybe even 7 months. And they had the gimmick of tag team champions that don't get along.
Yep.
One goes for the pin, the other tries to stop the pin, and all that stuff. Then the Impact player stuff, him and Justin Credible. His valet, Don Marie, who would be more famous in WWE later on, Jason Knight, their manager.
Yep.
ECW was really something. It was really something else, and it's a shame that people don't get to see that today.
I agree. And, you talk about that Candido partnership. I saw more of that when I started like downloading matches very illegally. But I didn't get to watch it live, and it's unfortunate. But same thing with that Rob Van Dam match that you mentioned, one of my favorite matches of all time. First time I saw that, I downloaded it and watched it after it happened, well after it happened. So yeah, no. And the thing with the Candido angle was Storm would go on into WWF, especially WWE, and kind of be the guy with no personality. When in reality, he's very animated.
Yeah.
And you see that in those ECW runs and even the WCW run a bit.
I remember the Rob Van Dam match. Everybody's into this match until Lance Storm does the cardinal sin of not wanting to hurt his opponent and giving a weak chair shot to Rob Van Dam, and the crowd boos the hell out of him. You got to admire that. Like everybody, I remember Balls Mahoney would zip tie chairs and just like hit as hard as he could. Like, I don't know how Masato Tanaka is still walking, let alone wrestling today. Like that guy took some chair shots that would like shove your teeth down into your taint.
Absolutely. And I think the moral of the story of what we're getting at here is if you've never watched ECW, please do. Go back, find it, watch some matches, just some phenomenal technical wrestling, high-flying stuff, and really the innovation, or one of the innovations of hardcore wrestling.
Absolutely. A lot of people say, oh, it was hardcore wrestling. It really wasn't that hardcore, though. There was some chair shots, there were some weapons, but then you get into the CZWs and the IWA Mid-South, where there are literally bloodbaths, like with light tubes and barbed wire and all that. And that would be human cockfighting to me. I'm guilty to watch that, though. Not the proudest moment of my wrestling fandom, but I enjoy deathmatch wrestling. But ECW was more about the storytelling. And would you say that Lance Storm's, the highlight for you personally, is the highlight of Lance Storm in ECW?
No. The highlight of Lance Storm for me, selfishly, was in WWE. Despite it not being, his greatest runs, house shows were coming to the Maritimes. I got to meet Lance a couple times. I got to see him live 4 or 5 times during that run. His stuff with William Regal that we'll get to was stellar. So for me personally, like I love his ECW stuff, and that's definitely the best wrestling that I would say Lance Storm had. His best push was definitely in WCW, hands down. But my favorite period was that WWF stuff, very selfishly, because it was all televised. I was able to watch it all. Yeah. It lasted a while, and he had some phenomenal tag team partners in WWF.
His ECW career would come to an end, not by his own choice and not by ECW's choice. Checks started getting bounced, and he bounced. He's like, I'm not going to work for free. Goes over to Ted Turner land, and some have described it as the Titanic hitting the iceberg. A breath of fresh air in WCW was Lance Storm, and I always heard this weird. I don't know if you ever heard this story. There's a story that Vince Russo wanted to bring in Lance Storm as Eric Bischoff's son.
I did hear that.
And then there was another story that the Disco Inferno was going to get the book, and he was going to do characters like Building, the evil building maker or whatever. And he wanted to bring in Lance Storm as a Martian.
Yeah.
So
can you imagine?
I think I can't. As silly as some wrestling is, that is ridiculous. Like that's 100%. DDT level, like dramatic dream team wrestling. That's something they would do. but they've been doing that since '97. You know, um, fortunately for Lance Storm, and I don't know if you remember this, when Lance Storm debuted in WCW, he did so as a babyface.
Yeah.
Like very, very short. I think it might have been a week or maybe 2 weeks, but he was a babyface. And then he took his. To me, that's where I remember Lance Storm the most, because with all the crap going on in WCW, this was a breath of fresh air. They started him by him winning the United States title.
They sure did.
And then after that, he won the Cruiserweight title. And then after that, as you see by the picture on the screen right now, he won the Hardcore title. And he renamed those belts to the WCW Canadian Heavyweight title. I think it was the WCW under 99 kilograms title and the WCW Saskatchewan open weight title or something like that. Something like that. Just right there, you see the personality in Lance Storm. But your thoughts of him in WCW?
Well, I mean, Team Canada was kind of formed there, and
Mike Awesome,
man, and that was some interesting times. It was really the only thing that I enjoyed watching on WCW in that period. So frequently, I would tape it on my VHS recorder, and I'd just fast forward and find the few bits that I'd want to watch, mostly Lance Storm stuff. And every week, it just kept like he won a belt, and I was like, "This is amazing." And then a week later, 2 weeks later, he wins another belt, and then another belt. And I was like, what is going on? And then he actually challenged for the World Heavyweight Championship.
Yeah. I was young at this point in time. This is 99, True. 2000. So I'm 11, 12 years old. Wrestling, it's not like today where you can go on YouTube and you can watch anything. Back then, if you had VHS tapes, you'd be watching the same. They're onion skin thin now because you watch those to death. So when I could watch WCW, whatever it was, I enjoyed it. But the one feud that I remember with Lance Storm is him and Hugh Morris that went by the name that just went over my head as a kid. General Hugh G. Rection.
Absolutely.
What a stupid name that was.
What a stupid time in WCW. But it was their attempt to be edgy like the Attitude Era.
Yeah.
And it was just failing miserably. Even the Lance Storm stuff, as much as I enjoyed it, the average fan just did not enjoy it at all. He's a heel. He's got all the belts. He's giving belts away to other members of his faction. And they're just hating it, but not for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he as much as WCW wanted him to, I don't know if he ever fully got over in WCW.
Yeah, in Canada, he certainly did. There's a few matches. There's one where it might have been the same match, but he lost the match like 5 times, but they kept like changing the rules on the fly. I think Jacques Rougeau was the special referee, and then Bret Hart like came into the ring and they raised Lance Storm's hand, and it's like he won the world title. It was incredible. Other members of his Team Canada faction at the time include Elix Skipper and Pierre Calouelette. PCO, Cory. You want to share that story?
As much as I love Lance Storm, PCO came into my favorite promotion currently, North Pro, Canadian Wrestling in Moncton, New Brunswick, and won the World Heavyweight Championship and then never came back to defend it. And won that belt against one of my favorite wrestlers in Maritime wrestling history, Dick Durning, and pissed me off. I hated it. To this day, I don't really like to watch a PCO match. Luckily for me, he's not really on television anywhere that I watch. So, yeah, that's my PCO story, man. But yeah, thinking back, God, those were good times for Lance, but that was really a bad time for WCW.
WCW would not last that much longer after this. 2001 March, I believe. Time Warner and the AOL merger, I believe it was. They basically gave wrestling the axe, and they sold WCW to Vince McMahon for, I believe it was $2 million, like something super cheap, like pennies. Vince basically bought the videotape library. Once that was over, Lance Storm is picked up by the WWF, and he's one of the first guys. He's the first guy
Yeah.
I believe he gets into the ring and he super kicks someone. I forget who.
I don't remember who he super kicked, but I think it was in Canada. It was in Edmonton or Calgary.
Yeah.
And he was the first one to start that WCW invasion.
Yeah. He continued his partnership with Mike Awesome. They were Team Canada. Mike Awesome also would win the hardcore title. The funny thing is, a lot of people don't remember this. Lance Storm won the Intercontinental title not long after this.
Sure did. And then ended up losing it eventually to Edge, I believe.
Yeah, I remember his reign lasted 27 days. And during this time period, you got to remember, this is Attitude Era, right at the tail end of the Attitude Era, where titles were hot potatoes.
A story here, which actually became something with Storm fans, was I think he lost the title to Edge, or there was a match, a big match in Storm's career, and he actually lost the title in 1 minute and 8 seconds. And after that, you would see some Storm 108 signs in the audience, kind of like ribbing that, like they appreciated what he did so little that he lost the belt in like 1 minute and 8 seconds because some other match went long.
Yeah, thank God Vince isn't there anymore, because like Lance Storm, me and you always you rib on me. Ultimate Warrior is my favorite. You rib on me for that. I rib on you for Lance Storm. But Lance Storm really, at the bare bones, was a great talent, and was a plus for any promotion that he worked for. You look at WCW. He was the one good thing. I mean, there was a few things in WCW. Booker T at the time was good. Diamond Dallas Page was always one of my favorites. But Lance Storm, was the United States champion. He made that belt the world title almost. Changed its face, put the Canadian flag on it. In WWF, the 108, I remember you telling me this story. And you got some great stories from house shows. So I want to hear those.
So I'll start with the ones that are not as fun and then go to my favorite ones. So I met Lance a couple times. One time when he was in Halifax, one time when he was in Moncton. Just, the Moncton one was, I was some jackass. He used to go to the airport to meet wrestlers, and Lance was there, and that's the first time I met him, and it was just truly an honor to meet him. I have a picture of it somewhere. I have no idea where, probably my mom's place, but it was just really an honor. And one of the big reasons that I became such a big Lance Storm fan is I've always been an avid reader, hardcore reader. I read a ton of books. And once I started following Storm more closely, I realized that he had a blog at that time. And he spurred me on to read one of my favorite authors to this day, Janet Ivanovich, who does the Stephanie Plum series, which actually ended up getting turned into a book, because he had so we had Storm Marks and he had bookmarks. So his club was called Bookmarks, and every month people would read a book that he would choose, and then he'd bring the author on for like a blog post, and they'd discuss the book. And it was very early. It was really ahead of its time, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And it was phenomenal. And because of Lance Storm, I read, F. Paul Wilson, like I said, Janet Ivanovich, many, many books. One of Jericho's book was one of the Bookmarks books. Like, he really promoted reading, because for him, his life on the road, number one, he was always a really good husband. He loved his wife. He was very proud. He'd tell you how much he loved his wife and his kids. And with that, on the road, you have a lot of free time. Yep. And Lance would spend a lot of that free time reading. And then he was like, if I can get some people reading, that would be phenomenal. So he did, and it worked. I mean, for me, it worked, and I still read some of those authors to this day. So props to Lance Storm. When I met him one of those times, I was reading one of those books, and I was like, hey, Lance, so you're the reason that I started reading this author, and he's become one of my favorite authors, and I've read most of his books, and I appreciate that. And I think for that reason, we had a really good conversation that day. I think we talked for like 5 or 10 minutes. And for him, it was just another day. For me, 18, 19-year-old Cory, it meant the world. Just that generosity they had, and he's just genuinely a nice person. And then it would go on. My favorite story, though, from Lance is at a house show in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And it was... So think about this, Cory. 2002, Mark Henry, pretty, a bit over. The Hurricane, crazy over.
Yep.
Val Venus as a face at that point, crazy over. Versus Albert, whatever, it's fine. The Godfather, always over. And Lance Storm. So this comes out, and I'm just sitting there, and I went to see a show, I think, a year before that, and Lance was there, and it was phenomenal. I loved it. I think he actually had an Intercontinental title match against Edge that night.
Okay.
But this match is the one that really is memorable for me because when I went and saw him in 01, I remember there was a guy sitting next to me that was a big Storm fan. We were both standing up like, woo, yeah, Lance. We loved it. But this night, I don't know what happened. Everybody in the building was Storm fans. Like, everybody loved his stuff. So, they're coming out. The heels are coming out. They had Lance Storm, and the crowd pops. He gets in the ring first, and the crowd's like, Lance, Lance. They're cheering him on. And then he gets out of the ring, and the crowd boos. And, Hurricane's trying to get his stuff over. It's just not working. So they tag Lance back in. Yeah, the crowd's going nuts. Then Lance tags back out, and we want Storm. We want Storm. So loud. And, it was just amazing. And unfortunately, the crowd hijacked that match, and Storm wrestled most of it. And he would go on to write a blog post about it the next week, because at that point he was writing blogs on his website, and he talked about it being one of the best nights of his career. And it's really cool when your favorite wrestler can say that he had one of the best nights of his career and you were there. You were part of that. So for me, that's one of my fondest memories as a wrestling fan outside of Maritime Wrestling. I love Maritime Wrestling. I live Maritime Wrestling. Can't wait to go see a show tomorrow night. Man, I love Maritime Wrestling. But as far as mainstream stuff, this is like the peak of me being a mainstream fan. Lance Storm is the greatest wrestler in the world, in my opinion, for technical wrestling. And maybe he didn't get the pushes and he's not the most entertaining person to everybody. But for me, he was that blend of he could fly, one of the best drop kicks in the game, phenomenal suplexes, just very sound technically. And I respected that. And he always took care of everybody he wrestled. Sometimes to his detriment with that Rob Van Dam story.
Yeah. You said this was in Halifax. Was this at the Forum?
No, it was at the Metro Center. Yeah.
The Metro Center, okay.